I'm going to talk about antibiotic recording and the UK system and what we've done. Right at the beginning, though, I would like to acknowledge all the sponsors of this wonderful event and giving me and my daughter the opportunity of joining you all in this wonderful place in Australia. We've had a fantastic time already. I've been bowled over by the hospitality, generosity and friendliness of everybody that we've met. So thank you very much. It's been great so far and really looking forward to the rest of our tour. I work for the Agricultural and Horticultural Development Board. We are the levy body, statutory levy body for the UK industries in agriculture. In pigs, though, it is just for England. We don't cover Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. We're made up of 6 sectors. We have a beef and lamb sector, cereals and oilseeds, dairy, horticulture, pork and potatoes. And in my role, I cover the R&D, research and development for beef and lamb, dairy and the pork sectors. As I said, pork is for England only. And we receive in the region of £12 million a year, I guess. We slaughter between 9 and 10 million pigs, and each pig that is slaughtered pays a levy of approximately £1.05. And with that money, we reinvest that into the pork industry to try and benefit the industry. We have departments that cover market intelligence, knowledge exchange, knowledge transfer, the environment, marcoms, farm economics, and obviously R&D. So although we get a lot of money, my particular budget isn't huge. And our headquarters are in Warwickshire in England. And for those of you that don't know, Warwickshire was the birthplace of William Shakespeare. It's a great place to visit. It's beautiful. There are lots of lovely little quintessential English villages like this one. Would encourage you all to come and visit it. And this is Shakespeare's house and his wife's house as well. So there's some really spectacular places. But I guess for me, the most spectacular places are the castles. So we have Warwick Castle here, which is a fantastic castle that you can go and visit. And the other less well-known castle is this park here called Stoneleigh Park. And this is where the AHDB headquarters are. So our building, this is an old picture, but our building is where the yellow circle is here. You'll see this nicely manicured piece of land here. But this is our building, so it's a relatively new building. It's only been up a few years, purpose-built, and on the site that was marked by the yellow circle. And what you can see here is that nicely manicured piece of land is where they do a lot of horse events. So we have a lot of dressage competitions, we have show jumping competitions, national championships, and if you look, you can see our AHDB sign here in our canteen window. So we have a spectacular view. My office is just in here. We have an open plan office, and so it makes a great venue to work. But it's not all roses. So this again is the picture of the site. And what you can see here, this red line, is the planned HS2, which is a high-speed train that goes from London to Birmingham. And they're in the process of developing the land at the moment, so we are a massive building site. You can't actually get access to these areas here. And when you look at where it crosses, it comes literally past our door here. It's within about 50 metres of our door. So, interesting times. If you're not familiar with geography of the UK, this is where I live. In London, in Hertfordshire, which is just north of London, and B is Warwickshire. And that's my journey. It takes me about an hour and 45 minutes to get there, and an hour and 45 back. I spend quite a lot of my time actually working in London and going to meetings, so it's not as onerous as it seems. But just to put that into perspective, and where we're worried, and I'm sure you'll all realise this, that this is where African swine fever is. So actually, it's really quite close. The channel is only 21 miles apart at its narrowest point here, so this is actually quite close to us. I was delighted coming through Cairns Airport that you've got some really good signs up in English and in Chinese. I only took the picture of the English one. I really wish that we could do that in the UK. Like Australia, we're an island unit, but we don't seem to have the same mentality. And coming through Heathrow, that was the only sign I could see. But I have been told not to mention the cricket, so I'll move swiftly on. So into the nitty-gritty of the antibiotic recording. I want to talk this morning about why I believe antimicrobial resistance or antibiotic resistance is our problem. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we mean by optimal use, deciding the targets, whether it should be voluntary, compulsory, or legislation. I'll talk a little bit about our electronic medicines book, the EMB, and how we got the vets on board. We know that antibiotic resistance is a natural phenomenon, and it's been around for years and years, and resistant bacteria have actually been found in the guts of ancient mummies, so it's not new. We know that, and it's going to happen. No matter what we do, it will always be around. When the problem comes is when it spreads, and we know that it is increasing. We know that most resistance stays within species, and there's some really good work just starting to come out in the UK that demonstrates this really clearly, and unfortunately it's not published yet, but it should be later this year, but showing that most resistance stays within species. We know that it does cross, but it is quite rare for it to cross between species, and the studies that are done are quite few and far between. But when it does, it hits the headlines, and everybody makes a real fuss about it, and a bit like the colistin resistance that came through a couple of years ago. You know, massive headlines, and everybody's then thinking this is going to be a really significant problem. And it does lead to big headlines. Dame Sally Davis was our chief medical officer. She's just retired. But she was a real advocate for trying to promote the responsible use of antibiotics. And she was very vociferous on the global stage, saying that, you know, post-antibiotic apocalypse is going to come if we don't do something. And actually, at that stage, back in sort of 2014, 2015, pigs were always being blamed. We were being told that we pump our pigs full of antibiotics, and that we were the problem behind this antibiotic resistance. And we really didn't have a leg to stand on. We knew that antibiotics were somewhat of a miracle cure. We use them widely because they work. They're quite cheap. They're quite easy to administer and feed. So we were using them quite widely, and a lot of countries still do. But as we know with miracle cures, we do have to be a bit careful. But when they were developed back in the 1930s and 40s, they were seen as this, you know. Go to your doctor, you can be cured of gonorrhea within 4 hours. Great. And so they've become really widely used, and everybody's seen this as a bit of a miracle cure. They don't know what to do, let's take some antibiotics. But as we know with all miracles, they come to an end. And I think that's where we are now, and why AMR is our problem. And I want to take this now a little bit more personal. So I'm going to show you a picture of my aunt. This is my dad's sister. And she died back in the early 1940s, and she died of bacterial meningitis. And she died before antibiotics were developed that could have saved her. And so she's a generation above me. We'll now move to my cousin's daughter, who died in 2016 of bacterial meningitis. And she died because there were no antibiotics left that could save her. So where I sit, I'm in the middle here. I'm in this generation here, and a lot of people in the audience today will be in that generation where we've had the luxury of antibiotics that work. And when we think of that in evolutionary terms, that time from when antibiotics were first discovered in the 30s to the time that we are now is such a pinpoint. And it's so fragile, and we need to do everything that we can to protect the antibiotics that we have for future generations. And so that's why I think it's everybody's problem. It's not just the pigs or the pig vets or the doctors, it's everybody's problem because it will be coming home and everybody will be affected by it. So I guess in the UK where we started, well, the vets were adamant, you know, I am too. We need antibiotics. They are brilliant drugs. They are absolutely essential to a lot of the work that we do as vets and as doctors. But the vets in the UK were adamant that we shouldn't have any voluntary restrictions. We have limited tools in our toolbox in terms of antibiotics, but there was pressure put on us that we should do a voluntary ban on certain antibiotics. Well, actually, the vets said, no, that's not our call. If the regulatory authorities want to ban an antibiotic, they can take away the registration. That's their job. That's what they should do. Shouldn't be us as vets, because those drugs have gone through the regulatory processes of being registered, huge expense, and if the regulators decide that they are appropriate to use, then we should keep them. So right at the outset, we said we're not going to ban anything voluntarily. There was a lot of concern that animal welfare must be protected and that we needed ways of making sure that we didn't harm animal welfare by just taking out antibiotics. And I think that's been a really key part of what we've done. We also believe in the UK, or a lot of people in the UK believe, that antibiotic-free is unethical. We do have what we term antibiotic-free supply chains, where pigs that are treated with antibiotics are given a red ear tag and they're not allowed to go into the normal processing. They go off down a different line. And those supply chains can then provide the antibiotic-free market, which is generally the States and places like that. But we know that modern livestock production, particularly with pigs, we have a lot of young, immunologically naive animals. They get diseases, coughs and splutters, as humans do. And we need antibiotics, particularly if we're going to stop mass mortality. So they are important. And we've been talking a lot in the UK about responsible use, and it's not just about reduced use. In fact, we're now stopping talking about reductions because we are concerned that people are just reducing and reducing and reducing for the sake of it and not using where they should be. And that's not the position that we want to be in. We need good evidence based and guidance on how we can use antibiotics responsibly, and that's what we've been trying to do as an industry. But also trying to look at what impact it has on resistance. And there are some results coming out now that, you know, we've been reducing antibiotics in the UK, not just in pigs, but in other sectors too, and showing that some resistance is actually improving, but some of it is making no difference at all. But they're very early days for that, and we'll keep an eye on that. I think the big thing in the UK was the way that the Pig Veterinary Society got on board with this issue. And you'll see that they are quite productive in what they produce. They produce a number of guidelines and targets, and these are all actually freely available if you want to go on the Pig Veterinary Society website and have a look at these. They should all be, they're not in the members section. You don't have to log in, be a member of the Pig Vet to get these, because the vets decided that this was useful information for people and they didn't want to keep it back for those just because they hadn't paid membership. They felt it was so important. The NPA, the National Pig Association, is a voluntary subscription organisation. It's kind of the union for the pigs, and they've been very on board, and we've worked really closely with them as well to drive the antibiotic stewardship programme. This report is July 2018, and it's their third iteration of their stewardship programme, and they've done some great work with it. And I'm pleased to see here that you've got similar guidelines going along as well. So responsible antibiotic use. What's being used? Well, I think where we started was that actually we weren't even looking. And if you don't look, you can't see. And you can't say, well, we're using it responsibly if you don't know what you're using. And that was a big wake-up call. There were some who were still not going to engage with us. people who were standing there with their fingers in their ears going, la, 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 I'm not listening. But they're gradually coming on board. The driving force behind this was in 2013, the government, the Department of Health, together with DEFRA, the Department for Environment and Rural Affairs, published their 5-year strategy. And that came to an end in 2018. But what they replaced it with in 2018 wasn't another 5-year strategy. They replaced it with a 20-year vision, because they said that this is such an important subject that it's not going to be done within 5 years. We're going to have a 20-year vision, and then we're going to have a series of 5-year strategies, action plans. And so we have a 5-year action plan that falls out of that 20-year vision. And that's really been directing where we're going. So the first step within the pig industry was deciding that we needed to act. We've talked about the people driving it, so we had a very outspoken Chief Medical Officer, Dame Sally. We had Nigel Gibbons, who was the Chief Veterinary Officer at the time, who actually called a meeting of all the sectors together, and he said, look guys, you know, you can either choose to do something yourself or we're going to do something for you. Your choice. And I think that was really one of the earliest points that the pigs went away and the pig industry went away and said, you know, we need to do something. And then there were two people really who led the fight from there in, but they were the figureheads really. There was a lot of support behind them. So the top guy is Richard Lister. He comes from Yorkshire and he's a pig producer, and he's also chairman of the MPA. And then this guy, I'm sure many of you know, is Mark White, and he's a kind of a semi-retired now pig vet. And they would get up onto the public stage and say, look, you know, this issue is coming at us like a steam train. If we don't do something about it, we're not going to be in control of what happens. And they really wanted to be in control of what happened in the pig industry and to have a strong voice. And Mark White has been in a lot of the press and advocating that, you know, serious change is coming, we need to do something about it. And here it is, Mark White does not mince his words. And this was in the Pig World magazine, saying that the pig vets are going to play a huge role in driving this agenda. But what was behind that? Well, the VMD, the Veterinary Medicines Directorate, which is the government medicines agency, as it were, produce our sales figures. So at the moment, or in 2015 and before that, the only figures we had on antibiotic use were what was sold. So a very crude figure. And they would produce a table like this, and they'd split it out into species. So if a product was licensed for pigs only, that would go in here. If it had a license that could be used either in pigs or poultry, it would go in here. But what happened here was the poultry guys said, well, we know what we're using, so the majority of this 212 tons is pigs. And all our pig vets were going, no, it's not, it's poultry. And the poultry guys were saying, no, but we measure and you don't. And we didn't have a leg to stand on. And I think that was kind of the tipping point that we actually thought, if we're going to defend our industry, we need to know what we're measuring. So you see, we had this innovation adoption life cycle, and I've applied it to the medicines recording. This is quite well-researched graph of how adoptions of new technologies occur. So you have the innovators, the people that are leading the way. And they're about 2.5% of the population. You have the early adopters, 13.5%. And then you have the early majority. And once you get here, the industry's got enough power behind it to drive it. And what you'll get then is you'll get the late majority and the laggards. And these are the laggards that sometimes will tail out way beyond here. But actually, when you've got the large proportion of the industry on board, it's very difficult for the laggards to have any say in the matter at all. So back in 2016, Mark presented to the Pig Veterinary Society, and he doesn't mince his words, as the reporter said, but he put up these, and I've cut these directly from his presentation. What are the concerns? If we're recording using the electronic medicines book, what are the concerns? Well, farmers won't like it because they've got to record it in their medicines book and they've also got to record it on the computer system. There are lots of old farmers out there who don't have the technology. Will it work? What's the point of doing if it won't? Will it be used? Should we review it in 6 months? What about security of data? Identification of high users. Are we going to be put out there and flogged for everybody to see that we're a high user? Identification of high prescribers. What about the vets that are prescribing? Are we going to be publicly shamed? And actually he said, you've got to get used to it because it's coming. And if we don't do it ourselves, the government's going to do it for us. So you're either on board or you're not. Why should we bother? We've got to start to counter the negative publicity around pig farming and antibiotic use, that picture of pigs being pumped full of antibiotics. And actually, while I've been in Australia, there's been an article in one of our national papers saying pigs are pumped full of antibiotics and they use them for growth promotion. So there's still a lot of misinformation out there, and we're trying really hard to get over that. But we know that data is power, and the government, in the wake of Brexit, have said that any of the subsidies that have been the EU subsidies that farmers have received in the past, not that pigs get them, pig industry don't, so we're quite stable in that respect, but they will be repositioning those monies for exchange for data, and they have indicated that antibiotic use is one thing that they want all the sectors to have data on. And they might be providing some help to farmers to provide that. If you don't measure it, you don't know what you're doing. But the EMB, a national data collection system, would allow for a consistent format of data collection. And we could compare it with others within Europe. The SVAC system would provide a consistent method of collation and comparison. And he said at the end of his talk, be under no illusion, antibiotic use in pigs is under threat. And as such, so are many pig farms. So those pig farms that weren't prepared to look at it, he felt were very much going to be under threat. So that was the background to it. And then once there was quite a lot of industry support for it, the rumour, the responsible use of medicines in agriculture is an alliance. It's not a body that does a huge amount, but it is an alliance of people that get together to discuss these issues. And they set up a targets task force in 2017, and they asked for a vet and a producer from each of the sectors. So this was across the board. So the cattle, sheep, pigs, poultry, fish, all the different sectors came together, and they had 2 people, and they set up the Targets Task Force. And within their own sectors, they decided what the target was of antibiotic use was going to be to 2020. And so our target was set at 99 milligrams per PCU as calculated by the SVAC calculations. And I have put in your proceedings links to those so that you can have a look at them and how they're calculated. So that's really where the EMB came. It started as a simple Excel spreadsheet that David Birch, another pig vet who's now retired, and I believe I should blame him for getting me here today. So he drafted up an Excel spreadsheet on how we should record antibiotic use. He then let AHDB have that, and we put that into a software system so that we could have an online central system. The VMD, the Veterinary Medicines Directorate that I talked about before, gave us a little bit of money, little pump priming to set it up, which has now stopped, but that was in 2015. And AHDB agreed to fund the rest of the database. And AHDB, as an arm's length government organisation, was going to hold the database. Because pork is only for England, we got agreement from Scotland and Northern Ireland. Wales don't produce a lot of pigs, so we just said that we would cover them. But Scotland and Northern Ireland contributed to the setting up of the database. and we agreed nationally that we would use the European measure of milligrams per PCU. And if you're not familiar with that, PCU is a population-corrected unit. So it looks at the total number of pigs you have on your holding and makes basically the 3 weight categories that look at how you record the weight of pigs on your unit. So this is the document, the standardized units for measurement of antimicrobials. And that's how it really started. To begin with, there was a voluntary submission of data. There was no obligation for anybody to put data in, but various groups decided that they wanted to. And very quickly, we got an aggregated, anonymized national figure. Very crude reporting, basic figures, and quite difficult to interpret on a farm basis because of the population-corrected unit. So it didn't really have too much meaning for individual farms. I just wanted to put this up. Within the EMB, when you log onto the AHDB website and you go into the EMB section, it does tell you what's going to happen to your data. We're absolutely paranoid about data. We've got this new thing called GDPR, which is all about data protection, and you can't collect data or share data or do anything with data, personal data, without the person who owns that data's permission. And antibiotic use on farm is the farmer's data. So we can't do anything with that data without their permission. So when they sign up to EMB, the producers tick a box to say, I agree to sharing this data to provide the industry and its stakeholder organisations, such as the VMD, with its decision-making and policy. So we provide an aggregated figure for the UK that can be fed into the European reporting system. And then anything else that we do, if it steps outside, I have to go to the lawyers within AHDB and say, can I do this? Can I do that? Can I share this data in Australia? And they'll say, yes, you can, or no, you can't. But basically, if I can identify any individual pig producer, then the answer is going to be no. And identification of individual pig producers, safety is that as long as you've got about 100 pig producers in that figure, it's not easy to identify individual. So quite big data sets. These are the categories that I was talking about. Sorry, I thought this was a bit earlier in the presentation. So the SVAC has 3 figures. So you can either have 25 kilos, 65, or 240 kilos. But if you're a breeder to weaner and you're selling your weaners at, say, 10 kilos, your figure for your farm is calculated on the weaners that leave your farm being 25 kilos. So actually you have a much lower antibiotic use than you do, which is why the system wasn't great when it started for these pig producers. But this is Europe. So what we've done within AHDB on the EMB is we've added in an additional 6 kilo weight category. The producer doesn't know, it's all done behind the scenes. So when they add in, when they get rid of their pigs and what weight they are, it automatically will calculate it for the national aggregated average on 25 kilos, because that's what it should be. But when we do the benchmarking for the individual farm, it's done on a much more realistic weight. We talked about the scheme being voluntary. In September 2016, Quality Meats Scotland, QMS, made it a requirement of their assurance scheme that producers would have to record antibiotics on the EMB. And Red Tractor, which covers mostly England and also some in Scotland and Ireland, followed suit in April 2017. Over 90% of pigs slaughtered in the UK are, in England, are represented on the Red Tractor assurance scheme. So if a producer wants to continue selling their produce as Red Tractor assured, they have to enter their antibiotic recording on the EMB. So although it's voluntary, if you're not Red Tractor, you're very limited as to where you can sell your produce. So it is voluntary, but it's not really. But there's no legislation there. And that's different from the rest of Europe where it is legislation. Belgium tried it to be voluntary, it didn't work, so they had to go to legislation. And so you can see that Red Tractor were behind that. And that was quite interesting, actually, because that wasn't a Red Tractor decision. That was the industry going to Red Tractor saying, we want you to make this compulsory. So that was the pig producers, that was the MPA, it was the pig vets. They all got together and said, look, we need to make this compulsory. And so Red Tractor had to alter their assurance scheme so that they would allow it. So it was really driven by Mark and Richard and the people that were supporting them behind it. And they did do a lot of discussions. They went to loads and loads of meetings and sensed the general perception of producers and vets. And very much they were on board, that they wanted it. Within the EMB, I think one of the biggest things that we've done is to put in a benchmarking facility. So here you can see, and in the second part of the talk, I'll go through this in a little bit more detail, but the benchmarking, and here it shows your usage, you're here, and the average use for your sector is here. So very quickly, when you put your antibiotic usage data in, you get this graph, and you can see really quickly how you compare with the rest of the industry. And I think that has been the biggest driver, because farmers, producers are really competitive. They don't like to see others doing better than them. So when they see this, they think, and then they go and boast, hey, I'm really good. I've done this, and look at me. But the ones that are high users, interestingly, they also identify themselves, and they say, what can I do? What do I need to be doing to be getting like you? And that's been a really interesting thing. So with the benchmarking, they can follow it either quarterly or annually and see how they're doing. And just on a national level, you can see that since we started recording in 2015, with relatively few farms putting in their data, this was all completely voluntary, we had less than 50%. And you can see that the distribution's quite wide. So there were some really high users and some not so low, but we were round about this figure here, so really quite high. And then we came down to about 212 in 2016, and we set the target for 99 mgs per PCU. That was the Targets Task Force, to get there by 2020. And this is incomplete data, and it looks quite good here. It does go up slightly with the laggards that came on and reported their use in the fourth quarter in 2018, so it did go up slightly. But you can see this trend down. When we started, we were really nervous about publishing data because, what happens if it goes up next year? If we publish this now and it goes up next year, what's going to happen? But actually, I don't really feel I've blinked, and we're here. And actually, we've got a trend curve now, and it's quite nice to be able to show that. And I'm much less worried going out to the media and saying, actually, we've had an increase in use. We've had real problems with swine dysentery over the last 6 months in the UK, and I suspect we're going to have an increase in use. So these are the actual finalised figures, and we've had lots of positive media over this, and Dame Sally Davis has been a real advocate of the pig industry in the UK. She's stood there on global fora and said how well the pig and poultry sectors have been doing in the UK. Oops. So these are our trends. We started off at 278 in 2015, 183, 131, 110, and our target for 2020 is 99. So reasonably confident. How did we set the targets? Well, if you speak to Mark and Richard, they will tell you that they did that. They kind of got a feel for where people were. We knew what we were using sales-wise. They kind of knew the industries and thought, well, maybe we could reduce it down to about a third over 5 years. They went out. They did lots of polling. They took out the little votey things to pig producers, to pig vets, to others in the industry. They got a sense of where people wanted to be. I personally thought it was too low. I didn't think we would get there. I wanted them to go a bit higher. I think I wanted them to go to about 120. But the rest of the industry said, no, we want to go down to 99. 99, it's below the 100, and that's why it was 99. There was no other reason than that, psychologically. And hopefully we'll get there. We've still got 2 years to go. So there has been a rapid decline in antibiotic use between 2015 and 2018. The trend is slowing, and the easy changes are complete, and we know that it will get harder. And we are at risk of other disease incursions, and I've already alluded to the swine dysentery outbreak, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about tomorrow if people want to hear about that. There is continued pressure from the government, and there are now people starting to say, actually, we need some legislation to get those laggards on board. They are going to bring the industry into disrepute, and we don't want them. And that's not the government saying that. That's not the vets saying that. That's producers saying that. They're saying, you know, you guys, if you're not prepared to look at what you're using, we don't want you in the industry. And they are now calling for legislation, and I think that voice is going to get louder. We need to understand the impact of antibiotic use in animals and on humans, and we need to keep it scientific. I think I am, like you all, will be fed up of hearing about the potential risk of antimicrobial resistance being transferred between different species, all that sort of stuff. I want to see much more concrete evidence of what the risks are, where it's occurring, why it's occurring, and what the impact of reducing antibiotics is doing to antimicrobial resistance. Where are the antimicrobial resistant organisms in the environment? Where are they? How are they circulating? And we just don't know enough about that. But we need robust science, and I think that's going to be a big call in the UK to get that. And we need to promote responsible use rather than reduced use. We've seen a lot of people reducing. We've had massive reductions in antibiotic use, and we're just starting to see some cases where actually they've been a bit overzealous in reducing antibiotic use, and maybe a little bit more prudent use would have prevented a disease outbreak. So I'm not sure how I'm doing for time, but that's my. Oh, okay. So I've deliberately kept it short for questions because I'm sure that I haven't covered what you guys want to hear. So I would like to open the floor for questions, if that's all right.